Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for the highly anticipated Doctor Sleep. And what Dr. Sleep is essentially about is we center on now an adult Danny Torrance, who now is going by Dan. Obviously, after the events of The Shining, he has been very affected by this tragedy and things like that. He's very tortured and all that kind of stuff. And he's also become a lot more in tune, though, with his Shining abilities. So when there is this new cult out there known as the True Knot, who feast on children that have the same abilities as him, he ends up taking this girl, Abra, under his wing, and the two of them basically work on, stopping this, the main member of that cult, Rose the Hat, from coming after her, but also forming a bond that helps them understand their abilities better, but also helps Danny finally start to reconcile with his past, and that's really all I'm going to say. So Doctor Sleep overall, I was obviously hyped for this film. I mean, not just because the fact that it was a sequel to The Shining, which, I mean, we really don't need one, to be honest. Like, it's not something that we needed, but it is something that is interesting. In fact, rewatching The Shining last month, actually, I found that there was a lot of avenues that they could very well take this. There's a lot of places that they leave that story at that they definitely could expand upon more. And so, while it doesn't seem like a film that needs a sequel, there's definitely more stuff you can do with it. So I was always open to that idea. But then once Mike Flanagan was announced, who I think is pretty much a genius with everything he's doing, especially coming off the heels of Haunting of Hill House, which is one of the greatest horror things I've seen basically all decade. That pretty much did have me sold. Ewan McGregor on board. I was really thinking this was going to be something great, and it absolutely delivered. Doctor Sleep is a fantastic sequel that is easily one of the best, I think, King adaptations we've seen in a while. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And that's another thing that I think got people on board with this right away. I mean, all across the board, the cast here really does an incredible job. But let's just talk about Ewan McGregor, who is playing, of course, our lead character here. Look, Ewan McGregor is probably one of the best character actors working today. He completely transformed himself into a role. He does an excellent job with that, and that is definitely no different here. He did a fantastic job as Dan Torrance, because like I said, he has become very tortured by what has happened. He's grappling with a lot of his past, but he also is trying to move on from it. He's trying to, live a normal life and things like that, but he also knows he has this ability. So you have a Dan Torrance here that is just far more aware of what's going on. Is far more, he knows the capability that he has. He has that experience, and McGregor just does a really great job just showing not only, like I said, the ability that Dan Torrance has, but also the empathy that he really does have for others. He really does want to help people, and he really does want to do what he can to get over this tragedy, and it's a very restrained performance. That's the thing I will say. This is not a big, showy performance, but I actually think it works better that it is so restrained, because, again, he's trying to stay relaxed. He's trying to stay as content as he possibly can. He's just trying to move on from all of this. And I think overall, McGregor's did a really excellent job here and definitely was very well cast here for sure. But easily, I think the big standout of this entire film is Rebecca Ferguson as the main villain here, Rose the Hat, who, honestly, I've seen her in a lot of stuff, but this might just be her best performance yet. I thought that she was phenomenal in this role. Not only is Rose the Hat incredibly menacing, but also has this very sort of welcoming presence to her, so you can see why people are so easily fooled, but she also is incredibly vulnerable in that way, and you really do get to see, why she needs what she needs. She's probably one of the most fleshed out villains I've seen in a while, and I really did love what she ended up doing here. She, again, is very clever, and she's very organized in that way, but again, she also is, someone that isn't completely invincible in that way. There definitely is a weakness to her, and I think in general, Ferguson just did a really great job fleshing out this character, never trying to make us sympathize with this character, but really just getting us to understand her, and not ever feeling like a one-note villain, and that's, I think, the best thing that Ferguson did. She took a role that could have been very one-note and made her so much more complex and so much more layered, and for me, ended up being the absolute standout of this entire film. She steals every single scene that she's in. She's someone that every single time she popped on screen, you have your full attention on her, and I just think she did such an incredible job in this film. And then Kyleigh Curran, I actually thought was a really great newcomer as well. This is easily one of the best child performances that I've seen basically all year. I mean, she did a really great job here for sure. Abra is someone who, yes, she has the same ability as Dan, but she's far more advanced than him. And there's a lot of things that she is kind of forced herself to come to terms with, and I think she did a really good job here for sure. She's someone that is very rootable in that sense, but at the same time, you're very worried for her, and I just think she was fantastic in here. Her and Ian McGregor have such fantastic chemistry, and she, I thought, just fit right in. Honestly, this is a child actress that I'll definitely be on the lookout for sure, and the definition is just a really great breakthrough performance, but the rest of the cast also does do a really great job. Carl Lumbly replaces, of course, Scatman Crothers in The Shining. He plays Dick Halloran here, or the ghost of Dick Halloran, rather, because, spoilers, Dick Halloran died in The Shining. If you guys haven't seen The Shining, why are you watching this review? But whatever. Regardless of that, he still did do an excellent job here. I really did love the way he embodied this character. I thought he was definitely very well casted here. I really like Cliff Curtis here as well. He plays the friend to Dan, and I thought he was definitely really great. I really liked all the members of the True Knight as well, especially, though, Zahn McClarnon as the character of the Crow was so good here. He is basically Rose the Hat's right-hand man, and I thought he did a great job. I also have to highlight, though, Emily Alyn Lind, who plays the character of Snakebite Andy. I remember when I saw her in The Babysitter and even Replicas earlier this year, and I just never really thought she was that great of an actress, but she proved me wrong here. She was fantastic. She's so terrifying. She's someone who you are very compelled by, but at the same time, you're very frightened of, and I just thought she did an excellent job here. Really, the whole cast. I mean, I don't really think there was a single dud in the entire cast here. I think everyone really did do an excellent job, and without getting into spoilers, they do actually get 2 new actors to play the roles of Wendy and Jack, because they have some flashbacks in there, and they both were excellent. I can tell you that the Wendy character is played by Alex Esso, because that's not a spoiler, but who plays Jack, I'm not going to get into, because that's something that I don't think a lot of people know going into this movie, but they did an excellent job, I'd say. I really like the way they were able to recreate those roles. They really embodied those characters quite well. Alex Esso especially, there were moments in the film where I forgot that this was a new actress. Like, that's how well she did at, you know, basically trying to replicate what Shelley Duvall did. I thought she did an incredible job with that. Really, everyone here just gives such a fantastic performance, and I really don't think there was there was a single dud in this entire cast. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because like I said, that is the thing I was most excited for here, and Flanagan definitely does not disappoint. The thing that works so well with this film, and this is something that Flanagan brought up when I saw the re-release of The Shining, it was like a behind-the-scenes thing about Dr. Sleep, and Flanagan talked about how much of a fan he is of Stephen King and how much he respects his work, and you can definitely see that here. You know, Flanagan tries to pay as much respect as he can to this story, but also is doing his own thing with it, and I really did love that here, because a lot of people are going to go into this thinking that this is going to be like the Stanley Kubrick film, and it's really not. There are definitely homages, there are definitely, some references, there's definitely some stuff, especially in the third act, that definitely does feel like Kubrick, but for the most part, it is very much its own thing. This film is not nearly as scary, it's not nearly as, I would say, psychological in the way. It's far more of a it's far more emotional. It's far more kind of, not necessarily grounded, but it's just not as, it's a different kind of tone. It's honestly kind of hard to describe than that of The Shining, and I think Flanagan did a really good job of that. Don't get me wrong, this movie is definitely scary. There are some moments that definitely had me on edge. There are definitely some moments that were very unsettling, but what I think Flanagan did the best with here is really the drama of it all. You know, he really does a great job in leaning into those characters, and that's something that he really showed in, like, The Haunting of Hill House, for example. But he's able to take some really heavy drama and really interweave that well with the horror here. So I think overall his directing was really good. I was very impressed by what he did here. It's definitely some of the best directing that he's done, and especially when having to take on a film, as successful as The Shining. When you are, directing the successor to it, there can definitely be pressure there, but it's definitely not shown. It does not, there's no clear sign that Flanagan was overwhelmed by what he was doing. No, it seemed like he had a clear idea of what he was doing, and I was very impressed by the directing here. The writing, though, also here is so great. I really did love the screenplay to this film for many reasons, not just because of the fact that I think the story here is really well done, which, again, I should say that do not go into this movie thinking it is going to be the same thing as The Shining. Yes, eventually, Dan and Abra go back to the Overlook Hotel. Yes, there are, the third act is pretty much all fan service and things like that, but up till then, it's all new material. We really take the time in focusing on these two characters, seeing what they've been through, especially when it comes to Dan. I mean, they really get into how after what has happened, and going all the way back to the 80s, the film actually starts off with him and his mother and them relocate, and them trying to, recover from the situation that happened. And we go from there all the way to now seeing Dan Torrance as a much more confident, but him kind of having to learn that because he is very much affected by this tragedy. And this does hurt him at first, but eventually he does try to overcome it. He is trying to make an effort to do what he can to move on from this, but like I said, he's also trying to perfect his Shining ability, and that's a big part of what the sequel is getting into. They really get into the idea of the Shining ability doesn't have to be a negative. Yes, he's constantly, visited by all these dead spirits and such, but it also can be a positive because there are other people out there just like Dan, and that's what this film is really trying to get into, and I really appreciate that. I really like what the film ended up doing with all of the Shining stuff, especially when it comes to Abra, because like I said, she is far more advanced. There are things that she can do that Dan simply couldn't, and it just shows what this gift can do to these people. And Dan especially, he actually learns to use this to his advantage. I don't want to get into it too much, but he finds a way to use this as a gift rather than a punishment, and that's something that I really did appreciate. There's a certain thing that he ends up doing where it he finds a way to affect people with this gift in a positive way, and it was really great to see. I think they did some really great character progression with his character, and I really did appreciate that for sure. But like I said, you care as much about Dan as you do for Abra, our new character, who she is, it's a different situation for her. This isn't just something where she discovers it at the Overlook Hotel. No, pretty much from the first scene, she already knows that she has these abilities, and she's frequently bullied because of it. People think she's crazy. It's not something that is really working out all that well for her, and she has to kind of learn how to harness it. And you can see why Dan is the person that is going to help her with that. And what works so well about this is that they really do take their time in getting you to get to know these characters, and that's especially true when it comes to the community of the True Knot, who I have to say are some of the most well-fleshed out villains I have seen in a very long time, because this could be something where because the fact we had such a great villain in the first movie, the True Knot could fall completely flat, but they really do take a lot of time to where you kind of forget that they weren't in the first film. You kind of forget, you kind of stop comparing it to the first film just because of how great of a job the film does with fleshing out this community. You get to know Rose the Hat, you get to know Snakebite Andy, you get to know, these other characters, and you get to see that even though, yes, they are villainous and they're doing all of these terrible things to these children, you completely understand why they're doing it, what this is really benefiting them, why they're really in this situation. And it's actually very interesting. And what I really loved about the film is that these are not, all-powerful, unbeatable villains. No, they actually do have a weakness to them. Abra and Dan's, Shining actually does weaken them a couple times. And it's really interesting to watch, seeing them, seeing how they are actually pretty good opposition. It's not just one of those things where it's a one-sided battle where, they want this object or something like that. No, there's far more to it than that. And there's a, there's a level of The Shining that these characters need, and you can understand why they do need it, but you also understand how Abra and Dan can possibly take them down, and they can maybe finally put an end to all of this. And because the fact that the True Knot was so well fleshed out, and Abra was so well fleshed out, and Dan's character arc was so well fleshed out, that only makes the actual plot that much more riveting. Once you start to realize why the True Knot is doing what they're doing, and once you start to realize why they are feasting on these characters in the way they are and what they're really trying to do, it's just that much more riveting, and you're that much more into what's going on here. And I think they did an excellent job with that overall. And again, yeah, it's a different sort of feeling than The Shining, where The Shining, I mean, you're just constantly on edge. This is more of you're very riveted and you don't really know where it's going to go. And it definitely did not go in the direction that I thought it was going to go. And I think they did a really good job with that overall. But they're still able to keep you invested. They're still finding new things to do. And I think that is very impressive for the most part. But again, like I said, that could very well disappoint some people because this film is very slow-paced in that way. But if you rewatch the original Shining, that is also a very slow-paced movie. It's not till really the third act when things get crazy and we get all of those super iconic moments, and that's the same with Dr. Sleep. Only Dr. Sleep has scary moments throughout the film. And I'm not saying The Shining didn't, because obviously The Shining gives you this very eerie, just uncomfortable feeling throughout, definitely. And there were definitely things in The Shining that were terrifying, like the old woman in the bathtub, or obviously the twins, or things like that. There were definitely some really creepy moments there, but it escalated throughout the entire movie. Whereas here, there are, I think the scariest moments are actually in the first act. There's one moment especially that is absolutely terrifying, and definitely one of the scariest things within both of these films. And I do think it is the scariest moment of the entire film. That being said, don't go into this movie thinking it's going to be as scary as The Shining, because it's just not. I mean, the film was never going to be. So if you have that if you have that attitude going into it, you are saying you're up with very unrealistic expectations. And I think that's something that people really need to do going in this movie. Adjust your expectations. Don't expect this to be as good as The Shining, because it is trying to do something different. And I really did appreciate it for that. And I think they did some really good stuff there. And like I said, just leaning more into the abilities that both Dan and Abra have, it just makes for a really interesting story overall. And yes, in the third act, things do get a lot more crazy. Things definitely get a lot more psychological in that way. We get a lot more into the Overlook Hotel. But it never feels like they're just doing this because, oh, fans will love that. And, oh, we know you remember that, so you're not going to care too much about the story. No, it actually does serve a pretty big purpose. And I think they actually did handle that quite well. And I've heard many people come down on this ending because of it, that, oh, there's too much fan service and all this stuff, but I feel like it's similar to Endgame, where, like, it uses fan service in a way that is purposeful. It makes it work for the story, and it never feels like they're just trying to only appeal to the fans. Yes, that's a part of it. Obviously, they want us to be like, oh my god, it's this, and it's this from The Shining, and oh, I know what that is, but it's far more about, does it work for the story? And I think it does. And I think if they were to, basically, nix it from the story altogether, I don't think the film would work as well. I don't think that the climax would be as effective as it is. And I think just overall, it made sense to go back to Overlook Hotel. And again, it never really felt like they were just cheapening out on what to do, so they just did the first movie again, because while they do go back there, they're not doing the same thing, and that's something that I think, even though, yes, people have complained about the fan service, I think it really is unwarranted in that way, just because of how different what they end up doing with it really is. Yes, it's the same place, but they do something completely different with it here, and utilize it completely differently than they did in the previous film. It's also because I saw many places where this could have just been a rehash. In fact, there's a point in the final act where I thought, "Oh no, they're doing the same thing again. I don't like this at all." And then thankfully they completely turned it around. They went a completely different direction, and that's the thing. There are many points where it feels like this film is about to do the exact same thing as The Shining, and then it completely turns it on its head. And I was so impressed by the way they were able to do that. Few films are able to achieve that. It Chapter 2, for example, is a good example of that. I mean, yeah, that's a film that I do think is pretty decent and is definitely fun, but a lot of it is the same as the first film. So the fact that this film didn't end up doing that and found a way to do its own thing, I think is very impressive and definitely one of the best elements of this film for sure. So overall, I was very impressed with the screenplay here. The cinematography is outstanding in this film. I think they did an excellent job with the cinematography here. There's one scene especially involving this astral plane of sorts that Rose the Hat goes in, and it was just breathtaking to watch, and there are so many scenes that are so well done. The way any scene involving the powers that Dan and Abra have, are really well done, and I just thought the cinematography here was just absolutely beautiful throughout this entire film. That's something that Flanagan always does a great job with, is that he always has great cinematographers, and I don't know if the same cinematographer for, like, his other films, but it definitely continues to be great with that. There's also this really cool motif they do with Dan that I'd love to get into more, but unfortunately it is very heavy spoilers, but it does involve the first Shining. That's all I'm going to say, but all I will say is anytime they came back to it, I thought it was really creative, and the way that they set it up throughout the film, it's not something you think is going to serve that much of a purpose, but they keep coming back to it, so you know eventually it is going to, you know, come to fruition at some point, and when it finally does, oh my god, did it deliver. I mean, the climax, they really do go all out here. I've heard a lot of people say the third act was the weakest part of this movie. I would highly disagree. I think the third act, they really went all out. They did a lot here that really did work, and again, it never feels just like fan service. It always feels purposeful here, and I think they did an excellent job with that here for sure. One scene especially, I'm not going to say too much about it, but it involves a drink that, it involves a bar that Dan goes to in the Overlook Hotel. That is the definition of just how you do a character arc perfectly. Where they end up going with that is so great, and I love what they ended up doing there. And the score as well. The Newton brothers have pretty much established themselves as a household name when it comes to Mike Flanagan. You know, they're very much part of his. They're very much a part of his legacy in that way, and they definitely don't disappoint here. Yes, they do reuse the classic score, but they do their own thing with it as well. And I really did like the score here for the most part, and the editing. That's something that is going to throw a lot of people off. This film is very long. Yes, it is almost 3 hours long and things like that. And some people are definitely going to take issue with it. However, unlike something like It Chapter 2, which I really don't think needed to be that long, this film absolutely does. This film, there's a very good reason as to why it is as long as it is. And like I said, it really is because of how well they flesh out those characters. So I really didn't care when there wasn't as much happening. Because yes, it does take a while for things to get going. It does take a while to really get us into the story here. But honestly, I'm kind of glad that they did it, because there's a lot they needed to cover, especially with Dan as a character. There's a lot that he has been through in these past few years that I think if the film wasn't as long, I don't think would have been nearly as effective. I think that those sequences still would have worked, but I don't think they would have been as emotionally impactful as they really was, and I think that's what really did benefit this film overall. So I really don't have an issue with the editing. That's definitely not one of my issues with this film, really at all. But segueing into some things that didn't work for me, there really isn't a ton here. There's a lot that I really did love about this film, as I said. So again, there is a lot that I really do love about this film overall, but there are a couple things that do bring it down. Not a ton, but just a few things here and there. First off is, while I do appreciate the fact that they brought back Dick Halloran, and I do like the purpose that he serves, he's kind of like a mentor to Dan, getting him more in tune with his abilities and things like that, I don't think he was in the movie enough. There's a point where he goes away. You know, he's in it for a good portion. He's very sporadic when he appears, but he keeps coming back. And then when he eventually went away, I was kind of like, well, why are you going away? I don't really understand why he left when he did, and I think they just could have done a little bit more with him overall. Maybe it should be because of how good Carl Lumbly was in this role, because he really did a terrific job here, but I wanted a little bit more there. But easily my biggest problem with this film, and the one thing that does sort of bring it down for me, is the final scene itself, which I obviously can't get into because spoilers, but I will say there is a choice that Dan makes towards the end of this film, and you understand it. It's very effective in that way. It feels like, okay, this is the perfect culmination to his arc. It feels like this is the best way to close it out, and I was all for what they were doing. I really liked the idea of what I liked what they introduced. I liked the way they ended up wrapping it up, and I thought overall it was very effective up until the final scene. The way the final scene plays out here, it just makes it feel like what Dan ended up doing was honestly kind of pointless, and I have a hard time understanding what the point of this thing he did really was. And again, I'd love to get into it more with spoilers and things like that, and you guys can always, like, you guys can always, like, message me and things like that about it, but I just really think they could have done a better job explaining that, because I've seen this film twice now, and I was hoping the second time I would understand what they were trying to do. And while I can understand to an extent what they were trying to do here, I just don't think it worked. I think they could have done a much better job with showing why this happened and what it really does change, because really thinking about it, I don't really think it changes all that much. There's definitely, it definitely helps in that way what Dan ends up doing, but I don't think that it changed as much as it needed to, and just overall, I had a hard time understanding what they were trying to do there. Other than that, though, I think Doctor Sleep is a fantastic successor to The Shining. It's definitely a very different film. Don't go into this film thinking it's going to be like The Shining. It's far more like King's book than it is with Kubrick. There's definitely shades of Kubrick in there, but it really is doing its own thing. It has a fantastic villain in the True Knot, who are, again, one of the most fleshed out communities that I've seen in a while. The performances here, I mean, Ewan McGregor, Rebecca Ferguson, Kyleigh Curran, they all really do kill it here for sure. There's some very eerie and terrifying moments. There's some great character development for Dan Torrance as a character. And just overall, I think this is out of, what we could have gotten here, and considering how this wasn't a film that was absolutely necessary, the fact that this even delivered in the way that it did, I think is an achievement, because so many horror sequels fall flat in that way. But just the fact that this was so different and that it did pretty much live up to my expectations, I overall was very impressed by Dr. Sleep for sure. And I'm definitely going to give Dr. Sleep overall an A-. But over, guys, in my review of Dr. Sleep. Let me know what you guys saw this overall, left your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.